Alrighty guys, here is our next landscape painting. And once again, we're going to start with some pre-sketches. Now this one has a lot more things in the foreground, so that's going to add some more trickiness to this. Now this pre-sketch, you can tell in the background where the water is that there's a horizon line kind of right here. Just a little over halfway through, with slightly less on top than there is on bottom. And then there is some kind of trees behind it. Now there's some ground in the foreground kind of right here like this. It's curving up. Now you can't see all of it because there's some bushes here and some bushes here, so you can't see exactly where the line is, but this line right here is definitely visible. Then you've got trees coming up over here, and you've got a big tree trunk coming up right here. And kind of going into darkness here. So we're going to start with our sky because we want to start on the background and work our way forward. Now the sky is kind of several different shades. It's blue up on top and yellow down at the bottom here. So we're going to add some blue. We want to go across into this tree here too, because we want to make sure that we're putting the tree over the sky and we don't have light showing through. So we're going to put down that blue, and then we're going to grab some yellow here. Make a little bit of green in the center, but not a ton, because it does actually kind of more fade out in between. So we're gonna go kind of like that here. Now we're going to grab some water, and we're going to fade out the yellow first, because the yellow doesn't fade out as far. Remember, we're not adding any more paint right here. We're just putting some water on here and spreading that paint. Just like this. So you get a nice even gradient. Now we're going to do the same thing with the blue up here. We're going to add some water, add some water and kind of bring it down. Just like this. And remember, we're still painting where that tree is going to be, because we want to make sure that sky shows through instead of just white paper. Bring this down. And just keep playing with it and blending it until it's about how you want it to be. And I'm actually going to take, because I have two different blues. I have one that's kind of a teal blue, which is what I used for this, and then I have one that's kind of a cobalt dark blue. And I'm actually going to take that and put a little bit of that up on top and just blend that down a little bit too. I have a little bit more variety in my blue in the sky here. Now we are getting reflections in this water. We've worked quite a bit on reflections, but never like this before. So we've got this part of the sky reflected here, and then we've got the yellow kind of reflected here, and we will have the trees as well. However, the way that it is reflected looks very different in this because it's not just straight water, so it's going to be a little bit trickier to paint. But so I'm going to grab that teal blue that I was using. I'm going to put a little line right here that I can branch up here. Grab some water, blend it out. Now there's some greenery that kind of comes across here in that water. It looks like probably some kind of plants growing on there, algae or lilies or something. So we're not going to have to do a ton of that blue going forward this way. But so then we're going to grab our yellow again. And this actually shows a little bit orange here too. So we're going to grab our yellow. We're going to add that in right here. We're going to spread it down. Alright, now we're going to grab just a tiny bit of orange. So what I'm doing is I'm getting orange on my brush and then I'm going to rub it almost completely off. And this is still pretty wet, so it'll kind of do its own thing. And the orange definitely lingers more around where the trees are. So wherever you think you're going to have trees that are reflected, just add some orange lines. And I have a lot of orange on my brush. I did not mean to put that much, but that's okay. So we're going to do that, and then I'm just going to wet my brush completely. I'm going to add some water on here, and I'm just going to kind of dab it around and blur it. And it's okay if those little lines kind of show up because it looks in the picture like it is streaking in such a way that the lines do sort of show. But we don't want it to be just lines. Now there is a little bit of yellow kind of down in here too, so we're going to add a little bit of that yellow into the water here. So this is just on the other side of where that greenery is coming through. It's catching some of that yellow. And it'll turn kind of green, and that's okay because it'll blend into that greenery. Just adding water, spreading it a little bit. Just like that. Alright, next step. So let's do some of this ground right here. And that's kind of a reddish brown. So if you need to get a red brown, you're going to do exactly what it sounds like. You're going to take some red and mix it in with your brown. If it looks really dark, add a tiny bit of white, just little bits at a time until you get the color that you want. So now I am going to put this on here, and I am going to just dab it. And it's on here pretty thick, and that is okay. I want it to be on here pretty thick. Because this is pretty much the lightest color that it's going to be, is this deep red here. So you don't have to worry too much about how thick this is, because it'll be darker colors going over the top. And the tree will end up being some similar colors, and it'll have the highlights in it. So if you go a little into the tree, that's fine, but don't do too much into the tree because then you'll lose the lines of where you want your tree to be. Make sure you get all the little white spots. Just remember, this is the lightest spot. You don't want to be trying to fill in white spots with whatever color you happen to be using later. All right, so now we're gonna go back, because now this back part should be pretty much dry. And we're gonna do our background again, because we want to try and stay working backwards to forwards, other than base coats on occasion. But sometimes you gotta let stuff dry, so then that's when it's a good time to go in for base coats. So I'm gonna take pretty dark green here, and I'm gonna do the same pattern that I did over here and just blot it. Following the pattern that you want your trees to be, which can be the same as it is in this picture, or it can be a little different. Just make sure you don't have clean lines at the top. You want to see those leaves kind of peeking through. Alright, we're gonna do some more underneath, but much, much lighter, because the reflections in this are a lot less detailed. So we're just gonna kind of and try to keep going up and down like this, because the lines in the water are kind of vertical. So just like a smaller, lighter version of what we just did up on top. We're going to do the same thing going across here. Some bigger trees here. We're going to do some of those lines going down again, which I have way too much paint on my brush. There, a little bit better. Try to get a little more off there. See, just a much, much lighter, kind of faded out version. Alright, now we are going to mix some dark into there, and I'm actually going to mix some black into my green, which usually I mix blue into my green to make it darker, but it's pretty faded out in the background there, so I'm okay with it being kind of a dull green. We're going to start at the bottom and work our way up, because this is where most of the shadows are, right? And we're going to start with kind of doing a line on that horizon line, because that horizon line is pretty dark and much more solid rather than the little bits of leaves, because it's much more dense down at the bottom of trees and bushes and stuff. And then just kind of bring it up, just like this. Now you're not going to have as many sharp peaks in this one as you did in the last one, because these are the leafy trees, not the pine trees. coniferous, not deciduous. Okay, we're going to do the same thing down here, but very, very lightly. Remember, we want to kind of follow that little up and down rule because of the way that it's reflecting. There we are. Alright, so then working backwards to forwards, we're going to do the trees that are kind of on the ground back here that are sticking out. So we're going to start with a light lime green here. So mix your green with some yellow. Because I want these to be brighter, so we're going to do now start in the center of where the tree is and work your way out. That way it'll be, there's less paint on your brush by the time you get out, so then you have thicker leaves here and less up here, and then you can see the sky through it, which is what it would look like. All right. I remixed my lime green, so this one's a little bit darker, and that's okay. Does not have to be the same. The human eye actually sees more shades of green than any other color. How cool is that? I wish it was more shades of purple, because that's my favorite color, but it allows us to see a lot of variety in our landscape and our trees and our flowers and everything. Alright, so we got our rough shape of our trees here. Now we are going to grab some black. And I still had green on my brush, and that is fine, because then that way you end up with more of a dark green than a solid black, which is good. There's a lot of variety in colors, even like black and white. Alright, so we gotta make real sure that we're not gonna get any black on this tree over here, because the highlights of the tree are gonna be right up against this black lowlights from the trees behind it. But we're gonna make sure that it's really dark down at the bottom here, because we got a lot of shadow coming through. And then just bring that darkness up like this. And then add little bits, when you have a pretty dry brush, add little bits of darkness up into these top leaves. But you don't want it to be thick like this. Otherwise you will lose your light source. Alright, now I am going to grab a tiny bit of brown and I'm going to mix that in with my green so that I have a different shade of green. That's more of a dark forest green. And then we're going to put that over the top here, and I did rub off some of it because I didn't want it to be too dense, and even still it's pretty thick there. Can go right over the black here. Just not all of it. You want there to be, this is the kind of middle tones that you're seeing here. Alright, now we're going to grab our light again. Light green. We're going to add back in some of the highlights in specific spots that we might have lost. So like I want more highlights in here. I want a little bit more up at the tips here. Maybe kind of some going down in between my branches so that I can differentiate them. More along the tips. We have a lot of light coming in here, in the center bit here. There's probably a gap between those two trees where we're catching light, is my guess. And I'm actually gonna mix it into my yellow a little bit more so that it's got a little bit of yellow even coming through there so that we really catch that light. Alright, so here comes a little bit more of that kind of yellowish color. Alright. The next furthest thing back is going to be that kind of greenery coming across here. And that's going to be a mid-tone green, so I'm actually adding a little bit of yellow to my green to lighten it, but I don't want to add my green to my yellow because I don't want it to be that light. I want it to be lime green. I just want it to be lighter. And then I'm going to start from here and work my way this way, because by the time I get over here, I'll have a lot less on my brush and I'll be able to kind of bring it to that point that it's coming to and show the leaves a little bit better, just like we did with the trees. Whereas this will be mostly covered. I'm going to try to make sure it kind of comes to this little point like this. Just like this. Alright, then I'm going to grab a dark green, but I'm keeping my green on my brush and I'm not adding any more water, so then that way it's pretty dry. And I'm just going to add in a little bit of the lowlights here. All right. So now we're going to do the plant that's right here. We're going to start with the mid-range green, so probably the standard green you have in your palette. It's not always the case, but a lot of the time. And now this almost looks more like it's kind of going up and down like this. It's a little bit smoother at the top, and we'll take care of that in a little bit here. But first, we want our undertones here. Alright, now I'm going to take some black, and I'm going to do some little lines underneath here, just swooshing about. Just keep kind of doing that so that it looks like you have little layers of lines. Those are those little branches kind of showing through. Got it? And then we are going to grab a much brighter green here. So we're going to mix a little bit of green into our yellow and get that bright lime green again. And we're going to have a pretty wet brush. Okay, so remember I'm using this flat brush. You can easily do this with the round one. It's actually a little easier with the round one. But what we're going to do is we're going to add in very specific leaves. So we're going to make sure it's really wet. And you can go ahead and layer them over each other a little bit. But the top of these leaves are catching the sun, and it's showing the whole leaf. And if you keep it nice and wet, it'll still have some of that dark that shows through, so then you don't have to do any shading of individual leaves because it'll already kind of do that on its own. However, I do encourage you to go back over it and do detail work. So anything that you're like, hey, I want there to be more detail in these little leaves or in the tree trunk or things like that, I very much encourage you to go back in and do that. So now I'm adding some white into that same lime green that I have going here. So then it's really light. And I'm kind of going over the top of them again. And you can have some that are just that light green, but you want to also be going over the tops of the ones that you already put in. Like that. Alright, now we are going to do some shadows down in here. So I'm going to grab a brown, not a red brown, just a regular brown. And I'm going to start under here because these have a lot of shadow underneath now. And then there's a lot of shadow kind of in the bottom by the tree here too, following those little roots that are coming down. And all along the bottom here. Just like this. Alright, we're going to add some shadows all along this shoreline here. Got shadows kind of coming down from these trees up here. And with a dry brush, in places that there aren't dark shadows, you're just going to put some little marks in here. Alright, now we're going to grab our black. I'm going to start kind of in the corners here because it's real dark in these two corners, so then we can rub off some of that black. Dropping stuff. We can add some extra low lights into these trees if we want, and then come down into the ground here. Do the same thing over here. You can kind of bring it up into the bottoms of these. And kind of go into these shadows, add some really dark spots on these shadows. And don't be afraid to do a painting more than once. If it doesn't turn out the way that you want, just try again. You probably learned some really good stuff the first time. The things that you messed up, you learned how to do the way you wanted, or learned how not to do at least. There's a lot of dark over here. Alright, now let's do our tree trunk here. We're going to start with black, actually. We'll start with black, and we're going to do what we do with the sky. We're going to add a bunch of color here, and we're going to fade it out, but we're going to fade it sideways. Because this whole part here is really dark, right? So we're going to make that really dark. Add some water and just start to fade it. And you want to make sure that it's not as dark by the time it reaches the side here. And you don't have to bring it all the way over. But we're going to kind of go like this. And feel free to let your lines kind of show through, because then it'll look like bark. It's really dark up on top here too, so I'm going to try and make sure I fade it a little thicker over here. Alright, now we're going to grab that red-brown, same color that we used down here. We're going to coat this side of the tree here. Go ahead and add some lines in. And just let it kind of go over the top of that faded out black here. Blend it together a little bit. But if you keep those lines, it'll look like bark. And grab some of the black down here and kind of bring it up. Grab some of the black from the side and bring it over if you feel like you need more dark tones. Grab a little bit of water, it'll let you grab that black a little easier. Go ahead and just add some dark lines in here like that. I'm just using the paint I already have on this paper here. Just like this. Now I'm going to take the tiniest bit of white, which will end up fading into this color because I'm not using very much. And then I'm going to add some extra highlight down here. Rinse off my brush. Just blend it up a little bit. Alright, so now all we have to do is the canopy up here. So this is just leaves coming down, and most of these are real dark. So I am actually going to take my green here and I'm going to mix black into it. So I have a nice dull dark green. And I will show you how to do the light in the tree in a minute. But first we're just going to do the leaves. So we got leaves coming from the top down. So we got, and they're thicker like this. Don't be afraid to let them be kind of uneven. They'll be facing different directions, so they won't look all the same. It's going to be a little thicker when they're up together like this. And we're going to do the same thing, kind of coming from here down. You can't even really see what the tree is here. It's over here with the branches kind of extending. But those leaves cover most of this here. And when you have a lot of paint on your brush, you're going to have it so it dries with multiple shades, because some of it is going to be more transparent. So I'm going to do some branches kind of here. Now, having a fair amount of paint on your brush is not the same thing as having a bunch of water on your brush, because if you have a bunch of water on your brush, it's just going to make a puddle, remember? Every time you mix your color, you're going to get a little bit different colors, and that is good. But then if you get, so I have a lighter green now, I'm going to add that in over here too, so that it doesn't look like it's only in the one spot. All right, so then let's add that sun flare coming through the trees. So what we're going to do is we're going to decide where we want it. So I'm going to decide that this little light spot coming through is where I want it to be. So we're going to take some water. We're going to put a little puddle of water there, okay? And you're going to be rinsing off your brush pretty regularly. Now we want it to be an X, like this, okay? So just take that water and spread it with your brush to make an X. Then we're going to grab from the middle, pull out. And every time you do that, you're going to rinse off your brush and try to dry it a little bit too, so you don't end up with another puddle. And it'll pull off paint. Got a little bit of a puddle going again. Alright, now I don't want this to come out into my sky here, so I'm going to grab and pull the other direction. Because I don't want to spread my green further. Just want to take it off here.